My name is Tessa Morrow, and I'm 31 years old. I want to ask you something before I even start. Would you believe me if I told you that my own sister-in-law had me escorted out of my brother's 4th of July party in front of his partners, his clients, and half our family, because she was embarrassed that I fix pipes for a living? Because that's exactly what happened last summer, and what she didn't know, what she had never once bothered to ask about in 4 years of treating me like something stuck to the bottom of her shoe, was that the woman she was throwing out had been quietly paying her husband's graduate school loans since the day our father died. I want to take you back to that afternoon because I think about it more than I'd like to admit, not with anger anymore. More like the way you think about a scar, you press on it sometimes just to check if it still hurts. It started 3 days before the 4th. My brother Marcus, wait, I need to use different names since I'm telling this publicly. I'll call him my brother. He called me on a Tuesday while I was in the truck finishing up a commercial job. I remember because I had grease on my hands and I answered with my elbow. "Hey," he said, and I could already hear it. That careful, apologetic tone he uses when he's about to ask me to make myself smaller. About Saturday. What about it? Brooke she's been stressed about the impression we make with the Hargrove people. You know Richard Hargrove is gonna be there, right? He's the senior managing partner my brother has been trying to get FaceTime with for 2 years. I waited. She was thinking, maybe when people ask what you do, you could say you're in facilities management? Or infrastructure consulting? It's technically not wrong. I sat in the cab of my truck for a long moment, looking at the parking lot of a medical building I had just finished repiping. A building that, as it happened, was part of a commercial property portfolio managed by one of the largest real estate firms in the state. A firm I had a contract with. "Sure," I said. "Whatever she needs." He exhaled with relief so obvious it made my chest ache. "And Tessa, maybe the work boots. I own other shoes, Marcus." He laughed nervously. "Right, of course. I just meant, I'll see you Saturday." I hung up and sat there a while. The thing about being the kid in the family who went to trade school instead of college is that you spend your whole life translating yourself for people. I stopped being hurt by it a long time ago, or at least I told myself I had. What I didn't tell Marcus, what I hadn't told anyone, was that I had been quietly making $4,200 monthly payments into a loan repayment account tied to his name for the past 5 years. The account our father set up, that our father asked me to manage, that Marcus assumed was some kind of deferred financial aid he'd never fully understood. Our father died of a heart attack 11 days after Marcus started his MBA program. He was 58. He worked doubles his entire life. Plumbing contractor, same as me, same as I became. And he left behind almost nothing except debt and a specific, quiet request he made to me in the hospital the night before he died. "Your brother is brilliant," he said. "He needs to finish. Don't let him drop out because of money." "I won't, Dad. And don't tell him it's you. He'll refuse it. You know how he is." I knew how he was. So for 5 years I had worked the jobs nobody else wanted. Midnight emergency calls to restaurants with burst mains. Hazmat flagged renovation sites. I expanded my one-woman operation into a crew, then a company. I underbid large contracts and over-delivered until I had a reputation that opened doors. All of it, quietly, while Marcus finished his MBA, passed his licensing exams, made junior partner, and started hosting 4th of July parties for the people he was trying to impress. I arrived at the party 40 minutes early to help set up. Brooke met me at the door. She looked at my sundress. A nice one, Coral. I had bought specifically for this, and her eyes did that thing where they scan and categorize in under 2 seconds. She smiled the way people smile when something is slightly less bad than they expected. "You look nice," she said, with just enough surprise in it to sting. "Thank you. Where do you want the potato salad?" I spent the first hour in the kitchen, not because anyone asked me to, but because it was easier. I arranged things and refilled things and stayed near the edges while Brooke moved through her guests like she was choreographed, tilting her laugh toward whoever mattered most. The Hargrove people arrived around 2. Richard Hargrove was in his early 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of easy authority that comes from never having had to explain yourself. His wife was warm and genuine in the way that sometimes catches you off guard at these things. His associate, a younger man named, and I'm using his real name because he matters to this story, Derek, was the one who wandered over to the food table where I was standing. "Great spread," he said. "You cook all this, some of it. You're Marcus's sister, right? He talks about you." I smiled. "Hopefully not too specifically." He laughed. "He said you run your own business. What kind?" Before I could answer, Brooke materialized. "She has a radar for this, I've noticed. Any conversation within 20 feet of someone important, and she appears. Tessa works in infrastructure," she said, touching Derek's arm lightly. "Kind of adjacent to what Marcus does, actually. Can I steal you for a second?" Richard was asking about the Meridian development. She moved him away smoothly, and I watched her go. 40 minutes later, during dinner, Richard Hargrove was seated near the head of the table. Marcus was beside him, doing the attentive, capable thing he does well. Brooke was across from them. I was at the far end, near the kids' cooler and the citronella candles. Richard had been watching me on and off throughout the meal. I noticed it but didn't think much of it. Then he set down his fork. "Tessa," he said. His voice carried. "I've been trying to place you. Do you work in the Chandler district?" The table went quiet in that particular way where everyone keeps pretending to eat. "I do, yes," I said. "Morrow Mechanical," he said. Not a question. Brooke's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. "That's my company," I said. Richard nodded slowly. "We've been using Morrow Mechanical for our commercial properties for about 3 years now. 14 buildings, I believe. Your site manager." "Terry?" "He saved us an absolute disaster last winter when the Kellerman Tower heating system failed on Christmas Eve." Derek sat up straighter. "Wait, you're Morrow Mechanical? My firm uses you for the Alcott portfolio." Brooke put her glass down. "I'm sorry, what?" "She owns the company," Richard said with a kind of pleasant confusion, like he was clarifying something obvious. "Morrow Mechanical is one of the largest independent plumbing and mechanical contractors in the region. We've been trying to get your sister-in-law in a room with our development team for months." Brooke laughed. A short, strange sound. "I think there might be some confusion. Tessa does residential work. Repairs." I looked at her. "Brooke," I said, keeping my voice even. "I have 212 employees." The table was very still. Marcus had gone pale. Not the pale of shame, I realized. The pale of someone doing arithmetic they didn't want to finish. Brooke recovered fast, she always does. "Well, that's wonderful," she said in a tone that meant the opposite. "She's always been so private about her work, haven't you, Tessa?" She smiled at Richard. "Family, you know. She never likes to talk about herself." "That's funny," Richard said mildly, "because I've read 3 profiles of her company in trade publications." I hadn't planned to say anything. I want you to understand that. I had not come to that party with a plan. But Brooke's smile was so practiced, so perfectly calibrated to push me back into the corner where she needed me to be. And I've been standing in that corner for 4 years. And something just shifted. "I should probably head out," I said, starting to stand. "Oh, don't be dramatic," Brooke said, low enough that only the immediate table could hear. "No one is asking you to leave." "You literally asked me to leave." "You literally asked me to leave." She laughed again. "I'm sorry. Tuesday. You called Marcus. He called me. You wanted me to say I was in infrastructure consulting and leave my work boots at home." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. That was just... Brooke straightened. "You're being sensitive." "I'm really not." Richard Hargrove had gone very still. His wife had stopped eating. Derek was looking at the tablecloth. "Brooke," Marcus said quietly. "Don't," she said to him, a flash of something real and sharp crossing her face. "This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. This is why I..." She turned to me and the social coating cracked just enough to show what was underneath. "You make everything about you. You always have. You show up here with your blue-collar hero act, and you just can't let Marcus have something without inserting yourself into it." "Brooke." Marcus's voice was different now. No, I'm serious. She fixes pipes. Good for her. That doesn't make her some kind of, I've been paying his loans, I said. The words landed like something physical. Brooke stopped. The MBA loans, I said. The ones Marcus thought were from Dad's deferred retirement account. There was no retirement account. Dad asked me to set up a payment structure before he died. I've been making the payments for 5 years. Marcus stood up slowly. What? Dad didn't have enough, I said. And I was looking at my brother now, not his wife. You know that. You knew it going in. He asked me in the hospital to make sure you finished, so I did. Marcus's voice broke slightly. Tessa, that's how much? Brooke asked. Her voice was very quiet. 250,000, roughly, over 5 years. 250,000, roughly, over 5 years. Nobody at the table said anything. I reached into my bag and set a folder on the table. I had brought it because I was meeting a client the next morning and it was just in my work bag. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't staging a scene, it was just there. But inside were consolidated loan records, bank transfer summaries, all of it documented because I'd had my accountant formalize everything the year before, for tax purposes. Richard Hargrove picked up the edge of the folder and glanced at the top page. He's a business person. He understands documents. His expression shifted to something respectful and a little somber. You should probably go, Brooke said to me. She was whispering now, which was worse than the loudness. You've made your point. Everyone's seen it. Congratulations. Brooke, Marcus said. I want her to leave, Marcus. I want her to take her folder and her check stubs and her little revelation and go. I stood up. I put the folder back in my bag. I'm not leaving to make you comfortable, I said. I'm leaving because I don't want to be here anymore. Those are different things. I said goodbye to Richard, to his wife, to Derek. I thanked Marcus for inviting me. He was still standing, still pale, and I could see him doing the calculus of the conversation he was about to have with his wife, and I felt a grief for him that had nothing to do with the money. Brooke didn't say anything as I left. I heard her start to speak to the table. Something about the dessert, something light and redirecting. As I walked through the back gate, our aunt, who had been sitting quietly at the corner of the table the whole time, and who I had almost forgotten was there, followed me out to the driveway. She's been doing this since the wedding, she said, standing next to me while I found my keys. I know. Your father would have said something long before now. Dad was braver than me. She put her hand on my arm. No, honey. He just had less to lose. I drove home. I sat in my driveway for a long time. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I just felt very tired. And also, and this is the part that's hard to explain, very light. Like something I had been carrying for years had simply been set down without ceremony on a stranger's lawn. The week that followed was, to use the most accurate word I have, consequential. On Sunday night Marcus called. He had been going through his loan statements. He had called the servicing company. He had found the account name. Why didn't you tell me? He said. Dad asked me not to. He knew you'd refuse it. Tessa, that's $250,000. It was Dad's money technically. I just moved it from my work to his education. That's all it was. He was quiet for a long time. That's not all it was. No, I said. I know. On Monday, I received an email from Richard Hargrove's development director, asking when I was available to discuss a proposed contract for a 40-unit mixed-use development in the Chandler district. By Wednesday, it had grown into a full proposal meeting. By Friday, we had a letter of intent for a contract that represented the largest single project in my company's history. I also, on Friday, received a phone call from Marcus. He was calling from outside his office. She's been told she needs to take some time, he said. There's a performance review process at her firm. Apparently some of what happened at the party has circulated in professional circles. I hadn't done anything to cause that. I want to be honest about that. I hadn't called anyone, hadn't posted anything, hadn't said a word. But the Hargrove family has a long reach in that industry, and Richard Hargrove is apparently the kind of person who notices the difference between the way someone treats a client and the way they treat a plumber. I'm sorry, I told Marcus. Are you? For her, yes. For you. Not for what happened. He was quiet. Then, no. Me neither. I asked if he was okay. I don't know yet, he said. I keep thinking about Dad working doubles. I keep doing the math on what you gave up. I didn't give up anything that mattered more than the promise. Tessa, I mean it, Marcus. He asked if we could have dinner sometime. Just the two of us. I said yes. The family fallout moved faster than I expected. Our cousin, who had never once been invited to one of Brooke's dinner parties despite living 15 minutes away, posted something on social media that didn't mention any names but was pointed enough that everyone in the family knew exactly what it was about. Our mother, who lives in Arizona and had heard the story from 3 different people by Monday morning, called me and cried, and then called Marcus and did not cry. Brooke's version of events appeared briefly on mine, a vague post about toxic family members who can't respect boundaries, and disappeared within 12 hours after our aunt responded to it publicly with 2 words, show receipts. What she meant was literal. She had photographs of the bank transfer documents I had shown her privately. She didn't post them. She didn't need to. The implied threat was enough. Brooke took the post down. The hardest part wasn't the party. I want to say that clearly. The hardest part was the weeks after, when I had to sit with the fact that I had let it go on for 4 years. 4 years of being introduced as Marcus's sister, she does some kind of trade work. 4 years of arriving at events with a dish I cooked myself and being directed to the end of the table. 4 years of watching Brooke make my brother into someone who called me in advance to manage the impression I might make. My site manager Terry, who has worked with me since I was a 2-person operation, said it best when I told him the whole story over lunch one afternoon. Terry is 54 and has a gray ponytail and has absolutely no patience for what he calls people who mistake paperwork for work. Here's the thing about letting it go on, he said. You weren't being weak. You were keeping a promise. There's a difference. But the promise ran its course. That's the thing about promises made to people who are dying. They have a shape, a boundary. They don't last forever. My father asked me to take care of my brother's education. I did that. He didn't ask me to absorb an unlimited amount of disrespect from my brother's wife in perpetuity. I had expanded the terms of my own promise beyond anything he intended, and I had done it because I was afraid that stopping meant I'd failed him. I hadn't failed him. About 4 months after the party, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Then a second one that said, "This is Brooke. I got your number from Marcus. I know you don't have to read this." I read it. She had written, "I spent a lot of time telling myself the story, where you showed up at that party wanting to humiliate me. I kept rewriting it so that you were the villain, and I was just protecting my husband's professional life. I think I needed to believe that because the alternative, that I'm someone who spent 4 years treating a person badly and not once asked a single question about their life, was harder to sit with. I know what you gave. I've seen the statements. I know what it meant. I don't know if you want an apology from me, and I won't pretend I'm asking for anything in return. I just needed to say that I was wrong, not embarrassed that I got caught wrong. Actually wrong. I'm in therapy. Marcus and I are in couples counseling. I don't know how any of it turns out, but I know I owe you the truth. I was ashamed of where Marcus came from, and I took it out on you because you were the most visible reminder of it. That was my failure, not yours. I sat on that text for 2 weeks. Then I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I mean it. I'm not there yet on forgiveness, not because I want to hold it over you, but because I think it has to be real when it happens. Keep going to therapy. Take care of my brother. That's all I need for now." She responded with 1 word, "Okay." And that was enough. Here's what I know now. 6 months out from that July 4th party, I run a company with 230 employees. Most of them come from families like mine, people who work with their hands, who learned a trade, who have been subtly or not so subtly told their whole lives that the work they do is lesser. I make a point of saying out loud, in front of everyone, that what we do has dignity, that it always did, My brother and I have dinner every few weeks. We talk about our father. We talk about the plumbing van our dad drove until it had 280,000 miles on it. We talk about the fact that when Marcus finally did understand where his education came from, his first response wasn't relief or gratitude. It was grief. Grief that he'd spent years trying to outrun the exact thing that had made his life possible. I don't think Brooke is a bad person. I think she was a frightened one. There's a kind of fear that looks like contempt, that dresses itself up as class and status and carefully arranged dinner parties. It's the fear of being seen as the thing you came from. I grew up in the same house as Marcus. I chose different, not because I was less ambitious, but because I found something I was good at and I built a life from it that I don't have to apologize for. Brooke spent 4 years apologizing for me on my behalf, without my permission, to people who didn't require it. The contract with the Hargrove Development Group closed in November. It's a 3-year project, the kind of work that puts a company on a different level. When I signed it, I thought about my father and his truck, about the doubles he worked, about the way he smelled like sweat and pipe compound when he came home, and still managed to help us with homework at the kitchen table. He would have understood, I think, both what I did and why I finally stopped. And I really do think, he would have been proud of the stopping, too. Not because stopping was easy, because it was honest. Because the promise had been kept, the debt had been paid, and the woman his daughter had become didn't owe anyone, anywhere, the performance of being less than she was. Not even at a 4th of July party. Not even for Richard Hargrove. Not even, in the end, for the brother she loved enough to spend 5 years paying for in secret. I still fix pipes, by the way. Not as often now, but sometimes when we have a complex commercial job and I want to see it done right, I go out with the crew. I get dirty. I come home tired in the specific, satisfying way that comes from solving a physical problem with your hands. I would not trade that feeling for anything. Not for a corner office. Not for a seat at the right end of any dinner table on earth. Ask Madison how that philosophy works out. Actually, ask Brooke. She's starting to figure it out. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to humiliate someone. Not embarrass, humiliate. The kind that's slow and deliberate and disguised as something reasonable, like protecting your husband's professional reputation or keeping the dinner conversation appropriate for the guests. Brooke never called me stupid. She never raised her voice. Not until the very end. What she did was quieter than that, and in some ways harder to name. She just kept arranging things so that I was always a little outside the frame, and I let her. That's the part I've had to sit with. I think about the choices I made over those 4 years, and I don't regret any of them individually, but I regret the cumulative shape they made. I kept showing up. I kept shrinking. I kept telling myself it was for Marcus, that the peace was worth the cost, that my father's voice in my head saying, "Take care of your brother," somehow extended to absorbing whatever his wife decided to serve me at any given dinner table. That was my mistake. Not my sacrifice. The sacrifice was real, and I'd make it again. The mistake was confusing loyalty to a promise with tolerance for mistreatment. Those are not the same thing. And it took me an embarrassingly long time to understand the difference. Here's what I know about cause and effect. Because I've seen it work in both directions. The way you treat people compounds. Every time Brooke introduced me as trade work and moved on, she was building something. Every time she steered a conversation away from me, redirected a guest's curiosity, arranged me at the far end of the table near the citronella candles, she was building a version of the world where that was normal. And every time I let it pass, I was building the same thing from my end. We were both constructing the same prison and calling it the cost of keeping the peace. What broke it wasn't a grand plan. I didn't arrive at that 4th of July party with an agenda. I had loaned documents in my work bag because I had a meeting the next morning. I spoke up because something in me finally said enough, not with anger, but with a kind of exhausted clarity. Richard Hargrove recognized my company's name. That was just the world being honest for once. The rest followed from that, not as punishment, not as reward, just as the natural downstream of things being seen accurately at last. I think that's what people mean when they talk about integrity holding up over time. It's not a dramatic thing, it's just that reality has a way of surfacing eventually, and when it does, What you've actually built is what's standing there. Brooke had built a performance. I had built a company, a reputation, and 230 people who came to work every day, knowing their labor meant something. When the moment came, those two things were simply visible at the same time, in the same room, and everyone could see the difference. Tessa Morrow didn't win because the universe balanced a scale. She held on because she had something worth holding. A promise made to a man who worked doubles his whole life and smelled like pipe compound when he came home to help with homework. That's where integrity comes from. Not from wanting to be seen as good, from deciding, quietly, when no one is watching, what you're willing to be. That's the thing I'd want anyone to take from this story. Not the money, not the contract, not the moment Richard said my company name out loud. The part that matters is the 5 years before all that, when no one knew and it still got done.